Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of An Extra Slice of History with the Butterfly Princess. This week, in today's episode, I'm going to tell you about the the powerful women that played a vital role in the Wars of the Roses. In the Wars of the Roses. And these women didn't fight on the battlefield, though they were constantly they played a vital and important role in the ever changing constant battle for the throne of England. Now, before I start telling you about the women players of the Wars of the Roses, I think that it's only fitting to give you a brief outline of the Wars of the Roses. The Wars of the Roses were a very turbulent time in English history. These wars were fought between the royal houses of York and Lancaster between the years 1455 and 1485. It only ended in 1485 when Henry Tudor, who was the first ruler of the Tudor dynasty, defeated Richard III on the Battle of Bosworth. The Battle of Bosworth in 1485. So that's a brief outline of the Wars of the Roses. And at that time, because there were many years of war, the throne of England was always changing between the houses of the royal houses of York and Lancaster. So now I'm going to tell you about the main women who fought who didn't fight on the battlefield, but they still fought for what they thought was rightfully theirs behind the scenes. So first lady we have is Margaret of Anjou. Now she lived in the years between 1430 and 1483, and she was the wife of Henry VI. Henry VI was a very weak king, and he was 1 minute he was king because the 1 minute the House of York, that Lancaster was victorious, and then the 1 minute he was thrown into exile because the House of York was victorious on the battlefield. So Margaret of Anjou, she was a French by birth. She was a French woman, and she was brought to England in the year 1445. So she was only 14 or 15 years old at the time, and she was brought to England in order to marry to become the wife of Henry VI. And as you know, as throughout all history, some women were thought as pawns in their family's rise to power. We see that in the Boleyn story, the Boleyn family. I mean, we'll talk about the Boleyns when next week when we discuss where in the latest episode of the Butterfly Princess book club. But like many women throughout history, Margaret of Anjou was used as a pawn in the marriage market in order to uprise her standing in society, or the family's upstanding in society. Um, And the reason that she was used as a pawn in the marriage market in her case was because England and France had fought a long battle, a war. So they were Britain and France were long fought enemies on the battlefield, and through the marriage of Henry VI and Margaret of Anjou, this marriage was thought to bring a truce between the wars between England and France. Uh, um, right, and many years later, Margaret showed she had a lot of single mindedness. So like in them days, so in like medieval times, women were thought not to think for themselves. You know, they didn't have their own minds. They were sort of ruled by the husbands, ruled by men, and women didn't have a very high place in society. But Margaret of Anjou was very single minded person. She knew her own mind and she would play uh, um, a pivotal role in 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 starting what would become known as the Wars of the Roses. These ongoing this ongoing series of battles between the royal houses of York and Lancaster. Even a century later, because of her self-mindfulness and her desire for like power and her determination, the English playwright William Shakespeare described her as um, um, described her as a she-wolf. That's where she gets the name. That's why she is known as Margaret of Anjou, the she-wolf, because of the that's how the English playwright William Shakespeare has been able to immortalise her throughout history. Um, um, and even when her husband, you know, because King Henry VI was prone to bouts of madness and delirium, he would, when he was on the throne, and even when he was banished from the throne because of the victory of York, he would go in states of madfulness and delirium deliriousness, and Margaret of Anjou would be so uh, would be so determined that she would go to extreme lengths in order to rule the kingdom of England herself in her own right. Um, so she gave birth to a son. He, um, she gave birth to a son. This was her only son with Henry VI. Um, Although it is believed some contemporary and it has been written that maybe Henry VI wasn't the father of Edward because he was fell into stupors and delirium and madness. But she gave birth to a son, and Margaret she was so determined in order to prevent to see her son Edward to the throne, to carry on the Lancastrian line, that she would stop at nothing in order to prevent the throne again from falling into the rule of the Yorkist family. So um right, so um but of course, Margaret never achieved full power. She couldn't rule on her own right. So because she was a woman, it wasn't known in them days to have a woman ruler, as we'll see in later years with the Tudors and Henry's desire to have a male heir. And she could only um, act through deputies. She couldn't rule by herself. Um, though there is a legend, I don't know how true this legend is, that her paternal grandmother, who was Lang of Aragon, who was a powerful protector of Joan of Arc. Obviously, Joan of Arc was a French saint. She went to be burnt at the stake because of she didn't believe that France should be ruled by the English, and so she went to the stake for her belief. Um, um, Leaf. So that is where her her thing was. She wanted to. Joan of Arc wanted to free France from English rule, and she died because of that. Um, um, 1 minute. Um, um, so and then Richard of York, Richard of York, uh, Edward Edward the Fourth was captured and imprisoned for a short time in the year of 1460. And this by no means, because of how strong a woman and determined a woman Margaret of Anjou was, this didn't stop her from campaigning for what she believed was rightfully hers, and that the Lancastrians were the rightful rulers of England. So she Scott um continued campaigning. She continued um to recruit men, and in order to fight for her cause. Um, and she did this, and she recruited men from from the Isles of Scotland and other areas on the continent. Um, she she uh she even in her desperate attempts and determination to like hold on to power for her husband to hold on to power, she forged an alliance with one of her enemies, and this enemy was Richard Neville, as who was known as the Kingmaker. Now, Richard Neville was the Earl of Warwick, who was known as the Kingmaker because he played a pivotal role in putting, people on the throne. So he played a pivotal role in putting Edward the Fourth on the throne and so forth. But he was a Yorkist, and obviously, Margaret of Anjou was a Lancastrian, but during these turbulent times, these powerful players, both male players, for change sides quite often, and so during the time that one time that Richard Neville, the Kingmaker, changed alliances. That was the time when he and Margaret of Anjou forged an alliance in order to make her son the rightful heir of England. And the way in which they did this was they proclaimed a marriage between Margaret of Anjou's son, the Prince Edward, and um, and the daughter of Richard Neville, who was Anne Neville, which we'll talk about it shortly. Um, 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 and this led to Henry VI being briefly getting his throne back in the year of 1470. But obviously, again, during these turbulent times, war broke out again, and Margaret became a widow and lost her son. So she lost both her husband and her son at the Yorkist hands, and this left her like devastated. She could she had no other roles of the dice, so to speak, to play in the Wars of the Roses, and she sort of returned to France, where she died. She died where she died in an impoverished poor state. So that's a bit of a brief about Margaret of Anjou. The next lady we have which is Cecily Neville. Now, Cecily Neville lived between the years of 1415 and 1495, and she was known as the Rose of the Rabbit because of her beauty. She was also the daughter of the Earl of Westmoreland. He was a very powerful political figure in the royal family. Um, she was 15. She was the senior of Margaret of Anjou by 15 years. So there was a 15 years age gap between Margaret of Anjou and Cecily Neville. And she was the wife of Richard of York, Duke of York, and 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 she was also the mother of Richard of York's children, the George Duke of Clarence, Edward the Fourth, and Edward Duke of York, Richard Duke of York, who will become Richard the Third in 1483. And she was sometimes friend and sometimes rival of Margaret of Anjou. And the way in which Cecily Neville gained a political and vital role within the Wars of the Roses was through the death of her husband, Richard, Duke of York, and her second son. They both perished at the Battle of Wakefield during the turbulent years of the Wars of the Roses. Um, that now this was the Battle at Wakefield was won by the Lancastrian line in the year of 1460. Uh, and but they only held the throne. The Lancastrians again only held the throne for a period of 3 months. Um, After them 3 months, the her son Edward the Fourth became king through the help of Richard Neville, the kingmaker. Richard Neville played a pivotal role in placing Edward the Fourth on the throne of England as for the royal house of York. Um, and obviously, Edward the Fourth decided to marry a commoner. I can't say proper. Edward the Fourth then decided when he became king, um, he then decided to marry a a a commoner by the name of Elizabeth Woodville. Now, she had been married before she was a widower. Her husband had died on the battlefield fighting for the Lancastrians, and she was the mother of two sons. Edward the Fourth was already married, was already promised to a French princess of royal birth, and his marriage to Elizabeth Woodville created uproar, and this again sparked more war battles within the Wars of the Roses. She was also very loyal towards her son, her other son, George, the Duke of Clarence. Now, um, there were rumours that Edward the Fourth the the wasn't the son of Edward, Richard Duke of Clarence, Richard Duke of York. He was the son of, his mother's lover, therefore he didn't have a royal claim to the throne. So, so then George believed that he was the rightful heir to the Yorkist throne. And so this tussled on for many months. Um, Edward the Fourth didn't want to execute Richard, his brother, the Duke of Clarence, because of loyalty, but then he thought that he had to because he wanted to be safe on his throne. But so George, Duke of Clarence, was eventually um eventually executed. He was drowned in a in a barrel of wine, allegedly drowned in a barrel of wine in the year of 1478. Um, that left Cecily Neville absolutely devastated. Um, and it was thought that, after the death of her beloved son, that George, the Duke of Clarence, Cecily then took a huge step back from the throne of England and the political backdrop. Because by then she was in her 60s, which being in your 60s nowadays isn't thought of old nowadays, because people are living longer in today's society. But in them days, it was seen as old. Even in the Tudor years, uh, becoming up to your 40s was seen as old. So in the 60s, in them days, Cecily Neville was seen as old, and could no longer play an important role in the political backdrop of England at the time. Next, we have the Anne Neville, who we've mentioned briefly before. Now, Anne Neville lived between the years of 1456 and 1485, so she was only 28, 29 years old when she died. She was the wife of the rich Duke of York, who would later become Richard III. And she was also the daughter of one of the daughters of of Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, who was also known as the Kingmaker. And she had another sister as well called Isabel. Isabel, and Isabel was the wife of George, Duke of Clarence. Um, so she had two husbands during her life. So, as we've mentioned before, she was married off to the Lancastrian Prince Edward, and this was in an alliance between her father, her father, the Earl of Warwick, and Prince Edward's mother, the Margaret of Anjou, who would later become her mother-in-law. Um, um, so, however, the marriage between Anne Neville and the Prince Edward, the Lancastrian prince, wasn't a very long marriage, um, because both her husband and her father died um, um, in a Yorkist defeat by the Lancastrians, and another battle fought within the Wars of the Roses in 1471. This was um, um, he was this was the Battle of Barnet that was fought in 1471, another battle within the Wars of the Roses. Um, and Anne Neville was also the great niece of Cecily Neville. So after the death of her husband and brother, she was brought into the hands of her brother-in-law, George, the Duke of Clarence, who was the husband of her sister Isabel. Um, he decided it's his fault that he decided to keep her under his control, disguised as a kitchen maid. Um, and this was thought because he feared that his fortune was he believed he believed that his fortune would fall into the hands of his brother Richard, Duke of York. Um, um, but in the year of 1483, she married for love because she was in love with Rick. It was believed that she could have been in love with Richard, Duke of Clarence, and during his coronation in 1483, she was crowned alongside him as his queen. Um, However, this marriage wasn't a very long marriage either because within 2 years of her marriage to Richard III and her being proclaimed his queen, Anne Neville died. Now, there are several rumours uh, about how he died because about how she met her end. Some believe it was poison because it was believed that Richard III was in love with his niece Elizabeth of York, which we will talk about shortly. And some believe that she died of natural causes because of the stress that was brought to her through all these rumours of Richard's betrayal towards her through his love of his niece Elizabeth of York. Um, Again, William Shakespeare depicts her and describes Anne Neville as a very tragic character. And this is portrayed, and she is portrayed as a tragic character in his Richard III play. Next, we have the commoner Queen Elizabeth Woodville. Now, she lived between 1437 and 1492. She was the commoner wife of Edward IV and the mother of the princes in the Tower, Edward V and Richard. Uh, um, Now, because of her secret marriage back to Edward the fourth, that took this marriage was held in secret because no one could know of the marriage because, of course, as I've already explained, uh, Edward the Fourth was already betrothed to a French princess of royal birth, and and Elizabeth was a Consumer by birth. Her father was Richard Woodville, a squire, but her mother did have some royal blood because she was the from a European house, um Jacquetta, and she was a minor royal peer in the House of Luxembourg. And she was through her marriage in 1464 to Edward IV. She was it is believed that Elizabeth Woodville was um, was the first Queen consort since the Norman Conquest. Um, um, so that so there's bit. Um, as I've already described, so Elizabeth wasn't born of royal stock, so she wouldn't have made an ideal wife for Edward IV, as you can imagine, because Edward IV was expected to marry a wife of royal blood. So when this marriage occurred between Elizabeth Woodville and Edward IV, it was a love match. And obviously, in them days, marrying for love wasn't very common. You married for your position of your family and alliances, but this was a love match. And although they were very happy to be married, other people weren't. Um, and they weren't happy as well because of the marriage of Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville. You know, the commoners family, the whole Woodville family, sort of rose through the political and royal ranks, and this caused a lot of upset and anger towards other royalist courtiers. Um, um, so Edward the Fourth dies in the year of 1483. Um, um, and before he died, they he made sure that you know his wife and his brother, the Richard Duke of Clarence, Richard Duke of York, do everything in their power to, care their son Edward V, who would become Edward V, to become to for when the time was right for him to ascend the throne. But um Um, however, it didn't work out the way that Edward the Fourth wanted it because Richard III, Richard Duke of Clarence, Richard Duke of York wanted the throne for himself, and he was eventually crowned as Richard III in 1483, as we've already discussed. So um, so that sent Elizabeth Woodville and her daughters, Elizabeth of York included, into sanctuary where where Richard of York, where Richard III couldn't get hold of her or her daughters. But there were rumours that she from her songs, she just the rumours that she um she took the decision to allow her youngest son to join her brother in the tower, but her youngest son being Richard. So she sent her youngest son Richard to join her son the rightful heir to the throne, Prince Edward, who would become Edward V. Um, um, and she was said to have not only sent her youngest son into hiding of the tower along with her brother, although there's some theories that they used a commoner bar disguised as Richard, and then she sent her daughter Elizabeth of York to the court of Richard III, and this is where it's rumoured that they danced together and they had a bit of a love affair, but they're just rumours. There's nothing fact based on that. Um, And later on, she also made an alliance with Margaret Beaufort, who we know we'll talk about shortly. She was the mother of Henry Tudor. She believed Henry Tudor was the rightful Lancastrian heir to the throne. Now, she forged an alliance with Margaret Beaufort, and she would recruit men in order to fight with alongside the Lancastrians at the Battle of Bosworth in order to defeat Richard III. And she promised, in exchange, she promised Margaret Belfort that her daughter Elizabeth of York would marry and become the wife of her son Henry Tudor. And they would obviously produce what will be known later on as the Tudor dynasty. Next we have of Margaret of Burgundy. Now, again, she lived between 1446 and 1503, and she was the sisters of both the three sons of York, Edward V and Richard III. Edward IV and Edward IV. So she was a mediator between her warring brothers, Edward and Clarence. They were always fighting and coming to blows during this turbulent time of the Wars of the Roses. Um, um, that's all there is really about Margaret of Burgundy. Next, we have the Elizabeth of York, who we've already discussed a bit. She was the daughter of Edward IV and Elizabeth of Woodville, and she ultimately became the wife of Henry VII and the mother of the Prince Arthur and Henry VIII. Um, um, and so his once once Henry Tudor, who would become Edward VII, defeated defeated Richard III on the back on Bosworth Field in in 1485. His claim to the throne of England was very weak. It was fair, but it was very weak through his mother's Lancastrian line because she was a descendant of John of Gaunt, And so, in order to make the marriage, his royal claim to the throne even stronger, he married um, he married Elizabeth of York, who was the daughter like we said, she was from the Yorkist side, and obviously, 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 Henry Tudor was from the Lancastrian side. Now, by the time that by the time that Edward that Henry Tudor had been proclaimed king in 1485, England had been at war known as the Wars of the Roses for 30 years, from 1455 to 1485. Now, this was a very long period, and people were becoming very tired from this, and they wanted finally peace and no more war. So, through the marriage between Henry Tudor and Elizabeth of York, these two warring houses, the houses of York and Lancaster, were sort uh, of unified. They sort of came together in peace, and that's how the Tudor rose was created, the Tudor emblem was created. You have the white rose of Lancaster, the white rose of York, and the red rose of Lancaster, and they're sort of collided together to forge unity and unification. Um, um, Again, and there's also rumours that despite, you know, despite rumours of, um, Richard of York being Richard being the one true love of Elizabeth Woodville, it was thought that they had very turbulent years earlier on in the marriage, but later on, as the years progressed, it was thought to have been a very happy marriage. They remained married until Elizabeth's death in 1503, and during that and after Elizabeth's death, Henry Tudor took no other wife, and when the Great Pretender Percy Warbeck came back to claim his his claim to the throne, um, despite the thoughts that it could be her brother, Elizabeth of York stood by her husband, and they obviously fulfilled their duty in cementing the Tudor dynasty line. Because they produced within their marriage, they produced two sons, Prince Arthur, who unfortunately died, but they also produced the spare Henry Tudor, who would become Henry VIII, who would rule from 1509 between the years of 1509 and 1547. And because of that, I think that is one of the reasons why Henry VIII was so determined to produce a male heir, also because he wanted to secure the Tudor dynasty for the next generation of rulers. The final woman that I want to talk about now is Margaret Belfort. Now she was the father of she was the mother of Henry VIII and would play a pivotal role in producing the Tudor dynasty. Now, she was one of England's wealthiest heiresses, and from the from the very young age of 12, it seems unimaginable nowadays, but in them days, women were married very young, and so Margaret was married at the very young age of 12 to to a man called Edmund Tudor, who was the brother of Jasper Tudor, who was thought to be her one true love. Um, uh, so Margaret Belfort gave birth to Henry Tudor at the young age of 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 13, because she was a descendant of John of Gaunt, who was said to be a vital carrier of the Lancastrian royal line. She believed that she put all her powers and emphasis onto bringing her son to his rightful throne when he became of age. Now, because Henry the um, it was thought um, that Margaret Belfort had a very bad experience of giving birth to Henry Tudor at the young age of 13, even more so that it put her off from having children for the rest of her life. So throughout her life, she only had the one son, Henry Tudor. Uh, um, and when Edmund Tudor died of the plague, she married twice. She had two marriages, one to Thomas Stanley and one other person. I can't remember the name of the top of my head, but Thomas Stanley was one, and one what and another one by another name, but I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I apologise for that. Um, these marriages produced no more children because she was determined not to have, engage in any sexual activity with either of her two husbands following the death of her first husband, Edmund Tudor. So she remained celibate for the rest of her life, and this is how she dedicated her life and ambitions um her son Henry Tudor to the throne of England. So these second marriages weren't for lust or desire or for sexual lust or love or desire. They were they were purely for political reasons in order to get her son Henry closer to his rightful throne. Um, in 1471, due to the ongoing conflicts of the Wars of the Roses, she felt she had to she felt her motherly duty of wanting to protect her son. So she sent her son into exile along with his uncle Jasper Tudor, and they went um into where she sent her son into exile, and along with his uncle Jasper Tudor, they served their exile for a total of 14 years. In the French town of Brittany, from where he lived, from being the ages of 14 to 28. So she didn't see her son for 14 years. And and it wasn't until 1485 that Henry Tudor landed on British Isles again. He landed on the Welsh coast with the task of invading England and taking his throne from the usurper Richard III. Um, and during that time, well, Henry was gathering his forces on the Welsh coast. Um, word came to Richard III that Margaret Beaufort played a pivotal role in bringing in bringing in bringing in bringing a in bringing an early rising against Richard, so he felt very threatened by this. So he placed um, he placed Margaret Beaufort under house arrest, and he put her husband, Lord Thomas Stanley, in charge of all her monies, all her lands, and she couldn't go anywhere without or get anything without the permission of her husband, Lord Thomas Stanley. Um, during After her son Henry Tudor was victorious, on the battle of the Battle of Bosworth on Bosworth Field in 1485. Um, she played a pivotal role in the running of his court. She demanded to be known as My Lady, the King's Mother, and she played a pivotal role in the marriage of her son Henry Tudor and Elizabeth Woodville, Elizabeth of York. She was known as the mother-in-law from hell. Uh, and when when Henry the 7th died in 1509, she only outlived her son only by a few months. Um, and she would play a pivotal role in preparing her grandson, who would become Henry VIII, to the throne of England, and that's when his role started. So between them, all the Tudors ruled England between the years of 1485, and it would find the Tudor line would finally finish with the death of Elizabeth IV, Elizabeth I in 1603. So there you have it, a brief outline of the main women who fought a pivotal role in the Wars of the Roses, even though these women didn't fight on the battlefield. They were still soldiers in their own right because they 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 fought for the ever changing throne of England. One minute it was in the hands of the Yorkists, and the next it was in the hands of the Lancastrians, and it would only become and it would these wars of the roses would only come to an end in 1485 with the victory of Henry Tudor at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. And all these women that we've discussed played a vital, impoverished role within forging these wars of the roses, but also forging the future royal line of the throne of England. So that concludes this week's edition of An Extra Slice of History with the Butterfly Princess. I hope you've enjoyed this latest edition, and join me next week for another extra slice of history. So tune in, and remember you can follow and keep up to date with the Butterfly Princess Show interviews, episodes, and everything with the Butterfly Princess Show by following it on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So you can follow the Butterfly Princess Show on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And I look forward to connecting with you on all them platforms. Until then, have a lovely rest of your week, and I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye for now.